Okay, it says preparing the live stream for the meeting. Now my tripod's gonna fall. Okay, we should be live now. Now I can't see anybody. Hold on. Good. Okay, here we are. Okay, let me fix. So I had to move my tripod to put in my password, and now I can't get it right to the right position. Okay, so hi everybody. It is Michelle Davis with Lone Star Left. Today I have three fantastic, wonderful candidates. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves. We have a candidate for the Texas House, one for the state Senate, and a candidate for Congress. So let's start with Gian first. Gian, if you could just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about who you are and the seat you're running for.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Gian Christopher Thomas, and I'm running for Congressional District 38. A little bit about myself. I've been an activist in the Houston area for the past 10 years, heavily involved in politics, working on different campaigns. I've been a field director, field organizer, all the way up to campaign manager, and just seeing what's happening in our country galvanized me to run for office. To help the working class, to help out minorities. We've got to make a change in this country, change the direction that is going in, and honestly, quite frankly, get the fascists out of office. We see what is happening on the opposite side of the aisle with us, and they are really just becoming cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, if I could just quite honestly say it. And so, yeah, we've got to get those guys out of there. They are not representing the American people. They only represent their own interests and their dear orange leader. And so when you have people like that, that's not fighting for the American citizens, working class people, and minorities, you've got to go. We've got to get those guys out of there. So that's why I'm running for office. That's a little bit about me. Also, I am a Hurricane Katrina survivor. So I survived Hurricane Katrina almost 19 years ago, I think. And I've been in Texas ever since. Texas has been my home. And, we're just trying to fight to get this place back on track.
Great. And careful, you might tell everybody your age. uh, Okay, now we also have Karthik Sura, who I have endorsed. I've endorsed Gian as well. Karthik is running for Senate District 15. Karthik, take it away.
Thanks so much for having me on, Michelle, and thanks for your relentless advocacy as well. This really means a lot. So my name is Karthik Sura, just like Karthik. I'm a former Rice University graduate, an award-winning HISD teacher and renewable energy developer, and I'm running for Texas State Senate District 15. I am not taking a cent of corporate PAC money, and I'll be the first minority to ever represent the 70% majority minority district in the history of Texas. To also be the first in clean energy and the first Asian.
Uh-oh. We froze.
Hello?
Did I freeze? Oh, you're there. Okay.
Okay, yes. Yeah, and so can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I decided to enter this race because the last session they attacked women's reproductive freedoms, they attacked LGBTQ folks, they tried to pass SB 1.
I don't know. We might have to go back to Karthik because it seems like he's having some connection issues, maybe. There you are. Are you there? No. So why don't we go back to Karthik, let him figure that out. In the meanwhile, I want to introduce you guys to Mo Jenkins. She is running for House District 139. Mo, you there?
Yes, thank you so much, Michelle, for having me on, and really glad to be a part of this panel. Like Michelle said, my name is Mo Jenkins. I'm running for HD 139, and I am super excited to be in this race for a number of reasons. One of the first reasons I like to kind of get out there in front, if elected, I would be the first trans woman to be elected in the state of Texas, but also to the Texas House. Um, Kind of my background, I got involved in politics kind of by happenstance. I originally wanted to be a cardiac surgeon, and then realized I didn't really like blood that much, so I kind of switched over to policy. And I got my first job on a political campaign, actually working for Barbara Canales down in Oasis County when I was in college, and then transitioned over and got an internship with State Representative Abel Herrero, who I'm proud to now serve as his committee director for the House Corrections Committee. Um, and this session was kind of a eye opener for me, especially with SB 14, being one of the only trans staffers in the ledge and being one of the most senior trans staffers in the ledge. SB 14 felt a little personal to me, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of took me, kind of switched a flip in my head of, okay, it's time to come from out of the background and come to the forefront. I'm super excited to be in this race and just share a little bit more about myself. I come from a low income background. I was formerly homeless after my mother passed away at the age of 13 because she couldn't get access to the kind of quality care that she needed.
Mhm.
And so I'm just super excited to be a part of this and share my story a little bit and talk to everybody.
Okay, perfect. And I think Karthik is back now. If you want to pick up the last piece.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me? Just trying to
Yes.
check. See, this is why we need to have like free public Wi-Fi and then broadband universally, so then we don't have to pay more for less quality. Um, but yeah, my name is Karthik Sura. I'm a former award-winning HISD teacher, renewable energy developer. I'd be the first minority to ever represent SD 15, a 70% majority minority district in Texas's history. I'm not taking a cent of corporate PAC dollars. And I want to make it illegal for legislators to also serve as lobbyists because that's what what's happening right now in the Texas state legislature. It's corrupt. And so I'm for new ideas like citizen-led ballot initiatives. And so right now in other states, I'm sure you've seen that in Ohio and Michigan and Florida, they've been able to get signatures and enshrine reproductive freedom onto the ballots. We don't have that power in Texas. And 109 years ago, it passed the House, it passed the Senate, but it failed by just 2,000 votes. So now Texas has changed, and I want to put things like Medicaid expansion, reproductive freedom, ending gerrymandering, allowing people more choice through things like ranked choice voting, online voter registration, universal gun background checks, and more through citizen-led ballot initiatives that unlock progress, because we're not going to get change just from Austin. It's going to be coming from working Texans saying that this system is not acceptable and pushing to change it. And I've just been a lifelong Democrat since I heard Senator Obama speak in 2004, and I was a community organizer on campus for him. And I'm really excited to be in this race to really represent every single person in SD 15. I testified at the state Senate against SB 4 because it's abominable. It's abhorrent legislation that's unlocking racial profiling. And I'm one of the few people statewide to say that how Greg Abbott is discriminating against Palestinian Texans is wrong, and to call for an end to violence against civilians. And really appreciate your having me on.
Okay, great. So I did not do this on purpose, everybody, but it is a coincidence that all of these candidates are from Harris County. So I'm up in Dallas, up in the Dallas area. It is kind of cold today, not as bad as we're expecting next week. I'm getting all of these warnings on my phone from ERCOT that it's gonna, who knows what's gonna happen with the grid. So, let's just go from there. And each one of you will have kind of a different role, Congress, Senate, the House. What do you think can be done about the grid in particularly? Why don't we start with Mo?
Yeah, thank you. And so the grid is kind of really important, especially with the legislation that we just passed this last session that was supposed to be grid reliability, energy reform, that really wasn't that, was more of just a handout to big oil and gas. And so I think one of the main things that I'm interested in partnering with other Democrats, especially in the House and across the Senate, is talking about actually tying our grid to the entire nation because we need that support and stability, right? And then actually talking about actual weatherization, not an incentive that, oh, if you weatherize, we'll give you a tax break or we'll give you some money. No, it needs to be required, especially on days like today where we have cold snaps. I saw on X, formerly Twitter, I'm gonna still call it Twitter, but I saw a video on there just looking at, the northern part of our state with these snap blizzard flurries coming in. And I was just thinking to myself, like, God, I hope the grid doesn't fail on them. I remember when the grid did fail in February. It feels like it was just a year ago, but it was a few years ago now. I was actually down in Corpus Christi, and my power went out, and our pipes froze, and the only
Oh,
place that had electricity was the university, and so I had to go and stay with a friend on the university, and all I could think to myself is back to when I was homeless. Was thinking like, my God, I hope that when I go out tomorrow and I go, just walking around, that the people that I'm used to seeing who unfortunately have to live on the street because there's not enough room in the shelters, I hope that they're still with us. And unfortunately, we did not have that. And so when I think about what we need to do, we need to diversify our energy portfolio. You hear Republicans say all the time, oh, we can't diversify because it doesn't produce enough generation. Well, it's because you rather incentivize oil and gas and incentivize renewables, which are sustainable, we could produce less of a carbon footprint, which could actually help us in the long run. We're not willing to open up and listen to those solutions. And so those are the two things that I hope to work with my colleagues on, is diversifying our energy portfolio and actually putting us on a correct path for shoring up our infrastructure.
okay, I like it. Okay, so let's go to Gian. So your position is a little bit different. Greg Casar a couple months ago, maybe 6 months ago, came out with a solution from Congress's perspective, that would force Texas to connect to the grid. What do you think about that? What do you think Texas has to do to make sure that we have reliable energy?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of what Mo was saying, we need to definitely join the national grid. What that does, and just to kind of explain that, when we had a situation like we had back in February of 21, where we didn't have any more power, if we were on the national grid, we would be able to pull power from other states to help us out. And so that's what we need to do. Another thing that we need to really do is, once again, like Mo was saying, we need to diversify. Oil is going to be king in Texas, and I think what people don't understand, we need a transition period. Like, we need to transition off of fossil fuels and to, like we were saying, diversify our portfolio in energy. And that doesn't mean oil and gas is going to be gone tomorrow. It's not. I think when we're having these conversations, I think that's something that, constituents need to realize. And so that fear of, oh my God, what are we going to do without gas? It's not necessarily there, because if we diversify, it's like we don't have to put all our eggs in one basket. You should never put all your eggs in one basket. And so also what we need to do, we need to weatherize our system. We had gas freeze during that freeze, and that's crazy. I mean, I've never heard of gasoline freezing. I don't even know what's the cooling point for gas, but
Yeah.
at the point in time that you have gas freezing in the wellheads, that's absolutely asinine. And just the amount of people that we lost due to Greg Abbott's negligence it's worrisome. And as we see, like you said, Michelle, we're getting advisories now. I saw something that earlier this month that we are going to have a freeze very similar to the one in 2021. So what are we planning to do? What are we looking to do to not have that happen? Because I don't want more people dying because of our incompetence.
So do you agree with Greg Casar that, Congress should have legislation that forces Texas to
The
join the
national grid,
national grid?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
I totally wholeheartedly agree with that. We definitely need that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go to Karthik. And same question. In Texas is a big oil state, and we have to do something to fix the grid. But what do we do about our, I would say, dependence on fossil fuels?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In reference to what they were saying, I remember where I was during Winter Storm Uri. It was like right around Valentine's Day weekend. And I was just trapped after like a date night with my wife, with my dog, frozen for 5 days. And like we had to put like multiple sweaters on our dog because we were super duper worried that she might die.
Wow.
And like we were like, should we brave it? Should we try and go on the highway? And it was just like over 700 Texans died. We had to create like mutual aid networks on WhatsApp. And I just want to encourage people, given the weather that we're seeing next week, to like make sure you bring in your plants, make sure you um, like cover your outside water accessible stuff. Make sure that you have a plan ready because this is no joke. In terms of trying to transition to, I think we need to set big goals. Okay.
Mhm.
So one of the big things that people don't know about Texas is what we are one of the #1 wind producing states in the nation. And this is something that occurred under Rick Perry. It did not used to be a partisan thing to make the energy industry some kind of like red and blue thing. It was just, let's just make Texas prosper. And so one of the things that we do best as a state is we set big goals and then we achieve them. And so I think that one of the parts of my platform, I'm the only candidate who's running who has a climate plan to say net zero carbon emissions by 2050, 100% clean energy, which could include anything that's non-carbon emitting by 2035. And then let's just see where we can, using the funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, how can we create a diverse portfolio? And I think one of the things I'm excited about as one of the first people ever with clean energy experience in the legislature is that there's so many people in the legislature that can't tell the difference between a gigawatt and a gigawatt hour. And I think that experience matters. And so I definitely think that we need to, at a state level, join the Western interconnection or the Eastern interconnection. And one of the big things that we need to do is just get high voltage DC lines. So I guess like it's really hard because the power grid is like this weird sort of creature that most people don't understand. So I'm just going to explain it with the idea of a highway system, right? So right now, imagine that the highway system is power lines and the cars on it are electrons, so to speak, right? And so what Texas is doing is saying we're not going to share our highways with other states, which makes no sense, right? We share highways, actual highways with other states. So why wouldn't we do that? We trust people in Louisiana to come into Texas, right? So we should do the same thing with our power lines. And right now, another additional thing that ERCOT is doing is it's making all of us pay more. And so everyone's electricity bills are going up much, much higher in a time of high inflation while we're getting less reliable quality of power. And so in other states, what they do is one, they share electricity across. So we could send high voltage power lines to some of the projects I've worked on have actually done this to integrate ERCOT with Alabama and Louisiana, right? So we could do that. But another thing that we could do as well is the fact that in other states, like they pay generators to stay like as backup power, right? So right now, the state of Texas doesn't have something called a capacity market. So it's sort of like imagine you have an Uber and you just pay for surge pricing, but there's like no cars available and everyone's paying out of their Whozu, right? When you come back from like a Beyonce concert or something, right? And so you're just like, oh, what are we going to do? The state of Texas is saying we're going to pay for a whole bunch of buses that are there, but only polluting ones. And so everyone has to pay for that extra set of systems. But what we could do is say, actually, there's buses that are available from other states that they can loan to us, or we can have some buses that other people set up, and we can loan those buses to other states. And so we can share the costs amongst one another, and we can also make it so it's net carbon neutral. So one of the really exciting things, I'm sorry, I'm just really passionate about energy policy, is natural gas plants. So people are so worried about employment, right? Very rightfully so, because there's good union jobs in a lot of these plants. But one of the things that we can do is when we have too much solar and too much wind, we can convert that into hydrogen. So hydrogen that's created using clean energy. We can take that hydrogen using some of the hydrogen pipeline networks that we have in Texas, and we can put that into the natural gas plants. So we preserve employment, and we also turn those plants into net zero carbon emitters, right? And so we can also export some of that hydrogen to Europe, where people were super duper worried after the Ukraine war. So we can get jobs, we can get reliability, and we can go to net zero carbon neutrality. But Republicans in the legislature are not thinking creatively. They're bought out by special interests. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running, and all of us right here are running, because we need new ideas to make our grid more reliable, more climate focused, and also to bring new jobs. And the Republicans will say again and again and again that, oh, it's one or the other. That's not true. It's not true at all. We can provide good jobs, we can solve the climate crisis, and we can also have a reliable grid.
That's a really great idea. I actually like that a lot. Okay, so you brought up climate a couple times, and I think that we definitely need to talk about it. I am terrified. I am terrified about the climate change that's happening. What we're seeing right now: fires, floods, tornadoes. Hundreds and hundreds of tornadoes, E3s and E4s happening all over the country. Lots of flooding, like California has been underwater for the last year. And Texas is a big producer of carbon emissions. So, as a polluted state, as a state that produces a lot of pollution, what do we do, in the short term and in the long term about climate change? And why don't we start with Mo this time?
Yeah. So I think when we're talking about climate change, especially in my district, one of the things that I talk to people about is about environmental justice, right? So in the short term, what we're talking about is that these large polluters should not be building the residential areas. It's been a well-known fact, especially in HD 139. Some of these toxic concrete batch plants have been trying to build literally in people's backyards in my district, which is insane to think that you would want to put this in a residential area and not in, a more commercial area where you could do that there, right? And so thinking about those short-term things of empowering TCEQ and empowering the Texas Railroad Commission to actually do their jobs and giving them enforcement teeth to kind of push back on some of these polluters, right? Or even thinking about some of the refineries that we have out here who do unauthorized flares. An unauthorized flare is going to run them a couple $1,000s compared to the millions of dollars that they're going to make that day. So they don't care about it, right? Because there's no real enforcement mechanism besides sending them a bill. There's nothing else that goes out there. There's nothing that requires inspectors to actually be out there in their plant, figure out, okay, why did you do this? And actually, shut down their operations to figure out what's going on. So I think those are one of the short-term effects that we can really do to address climate change in the state, of actually enforcing our laws, but also cracking down on these large polluters and ensuring that they're not, that they're following the rules and regulations that are set out for them, right? I think long term, what we really need to talk about, and Karthik really hit the nail on the head, is going net carbon neutral, right? So that should be the end goal of our policies. One of the things that the legislature did this session was punish financial institutions and insurance companies who consider ESG policies in their weighing of whether or not to invest with you or to have insurance policies with you. And I think that was one of the worst things that they've done out of the list of worst things that they did this session. But I think that was one of the worst things that they did, because that's how you force people to be more environmentally conscious, is you hit them in the pocket. As my dad always says, if you go for that pocketbook, they'll change all their policies, right? And so I think that was one of the things, is that when people, and not even just people, when these industries don't feel that there's any real repercussions to them, or especially to their bottom line, they don't care about our environment, right? Because most of the times they don't live in that neighborhood, they don't live in that area, so they don't care what happens to it. They don't care what happens to those people or to those children or to those elderly folks. And so I think long term, that's really what we need to focus on, is repealing that firstly, but also repealing HB 2127, right? Because that's another thing of how local communities were addressing climate change, and, making sure that they had an enforcement mechanism to punish polluters, but also making sure that they could have more stringent requirements than what the state was looking for. So I think those are going to be some of our short-term and long-term goals, especially in the Texas legislature.
Okay, great. So Gian, in Congress right now, well, I have to preface this by saying Biden, despite whatever criticism or flaws that, people have against him right now, he has been fairly proactive on environmental policy. And he's wrote a couple of executive orders to protect endangered species, which in turn, we kind of saw a death march from Texas congressional Republicans, Joni Arrington and August Pfluger, about the lesser prairie chicken. And it's on my YouTube. You can see the clips. It is ridiculous, because these Republicans are just like, well, let's go ahead and kill the lesser prairie chickens in favor of fossil fuels. But I don't know if that's probably not the way that we should be going. But Gian, to you, what do you think that Congress can do, in the short term and the long term to address climate change?
Kind of like what Mo was saying, we need to get, and what Karthik was saying, we need to get to net neutral carbon emissions. We need to come up with more technology to capture this carbon so it's not just out there, destroying our ozone layer. So I think one of the things that we can do is just heavily invest in green new technologies, come up with a pathway forward, and like Mo had said earlier, we have to hit them in their pocket. We have to hit them where it hurts, because these companies will always put their profits over people. We have seen that all throughout history. We saw that in the addicts area. In my part of the district, when they were building those houses, they put those houses in flood zones. And I was looking at articles and stuff like that, and developers were saying, in a couple of years, because as we saw, Shell and Exxon, all these oil companies knew about the climate change and knew about the how the weather was going to be changing in the upcoming years, and they did not decide to do anything. And so these developers knew that with these houses being built in this area, that they were at high risk of being flooded. So we have got to, put more, have a stricter, we have to have stricter laws on where we do our development and how we go about, progressing forward, especially with carbon emissions and things of that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And Karthik, to you, the Senate, SD 15 is blue. If you win it, that's great. I don't see the Senate flipping this session. So you will be up against Republicans. What do you think that you could do from your perspective, if elected, to push back and still get climate policy enacted?
That's a great question. I think hope always springs eternal, and I am really excited about flipping the other 3 state Senate districts that we need to in order to get a majority in the legislature. One of the things that I am excited about once getting elected is to help use SD 15 as a sort of base as the 5th most Democratic state Senate district to be a part of the Texas Democratic Senatorial Campaign Commission, so we can raise the funds necessary to flip those 3 seats. In terms of working in the legislature, the way I sort of envision working is, I think Representative Talarico is a great example of someone who knows how to wheel and deal as necessary. Like I think, helped lead in terms of teacher salary raises, as well as lowering the price of prescription drugs through importation from Canada, which are like priorities where he brought a bipartisan consensus. At the same time, I think he's been a pretty powerfully outspoken advocate in saying, hey, Tim Dunn is a billionaire who bought control of the legislature, and this is wrong. And so that's the sort of thing I want to do. This is like a giant special interest club, unfortunately, in the Senate. And so I want to advocate for using this district is so many people, and it's like the 5th most Democratic state Senate district. So I think one of the things that we should do is show a blueprint of policies that we want to fight for, like net zero carbon emissions, like getting a green bank using Inflation Reduction Act funding. At the same time, I also have to sit down with some of these folks and try and see what bipartisan things we can go over. I think one of them that is possible is a lot of different local municipalities are very interested in trying to lower their emissions. There's funding that we're getting from the Inflation Reduction Act, and also local philanthropy. So we could put together and catalyze a Texas Green Bank and see if we can use some of the oil and gas royalty funding that is there and just capitalize that and just say, okay, across the whole state, we're going to, and we don't even, if it makes Republicans in the Senate feel better, we don't have to use any language about carbon. We can just say new industries. And we could just say new industries in rural Texas that will provide new jobs and, union jobs in all of these areas and help catalyze that. And that's what they've done in a lot of other states. I think that's one very powerful bipartisan priority. And I do think that I've seen the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is basically bought out by special interests, and there's all sorts of environmental justice issues across Houston, from Acres Homes to Pleasantville, large amounts of benzene that cause cancer. In the area that I taught in the east end of Houston, it was just designed to just have a bunch of railroad tracks and like chemicals from those that have created a higher incidence in like largely Latino and African American communities versus the west end of Houston. And so I think really pushing the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to actually stand up for what it's supposed to do, have oversight in terms of permitting requirements, trying to set a mandate for environmental justice. And I think there are some sort of bipartisan priorities that we could also work with. For example, we have funding and financing for electric school buses. And so that lowers emissions in a lot of areas. It also provides for grid reliability because the school bus is just basically a giant battery, right? And so if that battery is full during ERCOT, it's like, sorry, if there's like an ERCOT's power, oh crap, we need power, you can just plug that battery in. Kids aren't going to school and provide extra power. And then also you lower emissions in a lot of these areas, which has been linked to higher school achievement for students. And so I think there are bipartisan areas to go forward on a piecemeal basis, and it's not always going to be as what we would want as advocates. And I think the answer is we need to push forward, showing a plan for what we want as an exemplar, push to get power, and also push to not make the possible the enemy of the good, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense. Speaking of bipartisanship and flipping the Senate, which, that would be amazing. But both Karthik and Mo are running for seats that are already blue. Gian, however, is running against Republican Wesley Hunt. So Gian, I want to hear from you. Like, what do you think is going to take to flip this seat in particular?
Ooh, to flip this seat, Michelle, that is a great question. To flip this seat, we have got to work harder than we've ever worked before. We have got to go to precincts that are already Democratic leaning, but we have got to get turnout in those precincts around 50 to 65%, maybe even 70%, which is doable in this presidential election year. We have to think outside the box. We have got to talk to young people. We have got to talk to working class people. And we're going to have some hard, tough conversations with Republicans. I had a conversation with a Republican yesterday, and I told him exactly what I was running on. And this guy was like, I agree with you. I think when you look at the policy positions, just overall, no matter Republican or Democrat, Americans agree with universal health care, raising the minimum wage, and just trying to get this country back on track, and also getting corporate money out of our system. If you take those talking points to just everyday working people, that stuff is going to galvanize. That's going to galvanize not only this district, but just working class Americans all over the country. And so that's what we're doing. We're having the tough conversations. We're knocking on the doors. We're doing some guerrilla marketing tactics. We're going to be at high dense areas talking to people. I know for most campaigns, that's not the strategy you want to try and go for. But when you're trying to expand your electorate and get more people to participate in the system, that's the kind of things that you have to do. You can't just think, hey, I'm gonna just, follow my van list, knock on these doors and think that's gonna be it. No, you have to hit apartment complexes, you have to hit grocery stores, gyms, everywhere, barbershops, churches. That's how we're gonna flip this district. That's how we're gonna get Wesley Hunt out.
Yes, yes. And everybody listening, if you are running for office, do what Gion says. Go to apartments, go to supermarkets, go everywhere, because what the Democratic Party in Texas has done in the last couple of years really hasn't worked. We, had, I think in 2022, we had 9.5 million people that didn't vote. And so, that is something that is plaguing our state. That's something that we have to change. I would like to hear from Mo. What do you think that we can do, individually, collectively, to let Texans know that, their vote really matters?
Yeah. So I think Gian kind of hit the nail on the head, is talk to everybody, no matter where they are. I chuckled a little bit when you mentioned about the barbershops and the grocery stores, because I find that at the grocery store is where I have some of the most genuine conversations, connections with people, because people are kind of just more talkative, I guess, when they're looking for things. And so, that's a great way to start a conversation. But I would tell people to look across the nation, right? To look at where we have flipped state legislatures, to look where we hold, 1-2 seat majorities. I really think about in Virginia, right, where they had, I believe it was a 1-seat majority in the Senate, but they were able to stop, abortion bans in Virginia and stop some of the more extreme policies of Governor Youngkin, right? And so when I hear people, especially young people, especially people my age, say, I don't understand why I should vote, it doesn't matter to me anything, my first question back to them is, okay, do you drive your car? Do you go to the grocery store? Do you get gas? Do you like to go to the movies? All of those things are covered by politics, are covered by policy. And so I think when you make it personable to people, when you talk about those kitchen table issues that they're really concerned with, not just the culture war things that Republicans are continuously trying to shove down their throat, people start to realize oh, if I want something, this is where it starts. And so I have love talking about them. My 4 younger siblings, being adopted. And so each of them kind of were like, oh, I'm not going to vote. I don't understand politics. I don't understand it. Right. And so being the only politically minded person in our family, I talk to them all the time about it. And so I'm proud to say that all of my siblings are finally registered to vote and will be voting in this upcoming election. But some of the things I talked about was you guys are upset because you go down the street and there's a pothole and nobody ever fixes it. Okay, that's when you need to engage your local elected leaders, right? But you can't engage with them if you don't know who they are. And so for the longest time, my sister could not tell us who the mayor was, and broke my little heart, but it's okay. Now she knows. Now she knows who the mayor is, and she knows who her city council person is. And so I think that's what it is. We have to start getting to people when they're young and letting them know, this is the importance of your vote. And so one of the things that I want to do and join in some of my colleagues is bringing civic lessons back into our schools, because it is so important to understand how the system works and how you can be engaged in it, right? It's not just people like ourselves who are running, who are trying to get into elected office and make change, but it's also the people who vote, who organize their community, understanding the importance of why you need precinct chairs and what is the purpose that they play in our system at large. And so I think that's one of the main things that we need to talk about in order to be able to eventually flip the Texas House and flip the Texas Senate. No shade to Karthik. I understand that, you guys only need 3 seats over there in the Senate. But I will say we have a lot of vulnerable seats in the House. Some members, I'm not going to name names, but some members purposely made themselves a little bit vulnerable because they wanted a sports arena in their district. And so I think that's one of the seats that we need to go after, that we can easily flip if we just had people who were more engaged in the process.
And you bring up a good point, and to Karthik, right now, and you will hear me give the Texas Democratic Party praise, which I don't always do, but this is something that they should be praised for. They did get Democratic candidates against every Republican senator that's running, that has re-election coming up this year. So Karthik, from the Senate's perspective, whether it flips or it doesn't flip, what do you think could be done, maybe legislatively, to increase voter turnout?
Oh, yes, a lot of ideas. One
Okay.
is that one of the reasons I'm passionate about, to go off of what Mo was saying, I think that you can have, and what Gian was saying, you can have a lot of these conversations with voters, Republicans, and even the most far right Republicans, because when you look at poll after poll and conversation after conversation, everyone agrees that the country is just kind of broken in terms of a system that's just not working in the 21st century. And what people want is some kind of reform. Maybe they want to have more party choices. Maybe they think the system should actually be more simple for people. And I think when you start with that premise and just say, hey, actually, I'm a Texan. We might disagree about this stuff, but we all agree the system is broken and we need to change it in some ways. You can have a lot more powerful conversations than you anticipate. And I think that the Democratic Party needs to be engaging with everyone. In terms of procedural steps, one is that Texas is one of the few states that does not allow for online voter registration. I think 42 states allow for it. We don't for whatever reason. And so it's an extra barrier. And a lot of the people that could register online are disproportionately millennial and Gen Z and don't necessarily, we're all unfortunately a little bit allergic to mail. And so the Gian right here, if Congress can sort of act and incentivize the state of Texas or in some other way, I think Democrats aren't thinking about that. And I think our existing federal representation should be trying to push for some kind of incentive for online voter registration. In terms of the party in increasing people's turnout, 50% of the precincts in Harris County are unoccupied in terms of the precinct chairs, which is astounding. We need to be recruiting a ton of different people. And I really love the folks who are precinct chairs right now. They work tirelessly. It's a volunteer position. We need to be supporting them and giving them the training to use new technologies. But we also need to be making sure that the party is trying to grow and reach out to younger folks. In 2024, the statistic I saw was that 48% of the voting eligible population of Texas will be millennials and Gen Z, right? But the voter turnout is not remotely that. And a lot of people just turn to me when I go to meetings and say oh, I'm glad you're here. You need to get people to come out. And I'm like, cool, vote for young candidates. We'll try and turn out young people. But it's also in the same way that the DNC has this percent of trying to make sure that every single group is adequately represented in a census appropriate way, we need to be doing that about age in the Democratic Party and really trying to think beyond the sort of, it can't just be a club for the folks that are already there. It needs to be an expansive, warm organization that all of us want to help build that reaches out to a whole bunch of people and through different settings. One of the things that we're doing on our campaign is unleashing, there's over 124 languages spoken in Harris County, 8 to 10 large scale ones. With generative AI, we can start doing and reaching out to all of these things, right? SB 147, for example, was a bill that targeted Chinese Americans. I don't think the Harris County Democratic Party or even the Texas Democratic Party has a WeChat or a Kakao chat for reaching out to Korean Americans or Chinese Americans, right? And there's lots of groups that people haven't ever targeted and reached out to. And so I think the answer is, not to get too into ancient Chinese philosophy, but in the art of war, there's this quote and it says by Sun Tzu, it's be like water and flow into all the areas where your opponent isn't. And that's what we need to be doing as a party, because if we want to flip this state, it's going to take a large scale effort and a lot of creativity. If we have to call some, I think under the Motor Voter Act, high schools are required to register seniors, but 1/3 of them are not in compliance, right? So what are we doing? We have elected Democrats in power. Why aren't they pushing for voter registration, right? And that should be a nonpartisan thing that high school kids can vote. If they all want to vote Republican, I don't agree with that, but they have that right. And we should be encouraging registration participation. So we need to be thinking like that instead of just wanting to have people that could say, this is my fiefdom, this is my area, I'm going to use the power in the legislature to enrich myself. And I think that's not what we need. We need to have candidates who are going to be helping everybody across the ballot. And I want to see Gian in office, Mo in office, all these folks in office, because that's the way the party is going to grow, by having a party that's a team and that's thinking creatively.
I love it. Sticking with you, Karthik, and I know that Mo mentioned civics lessons, and it really made me think because right now in Washington, D.C., Republicans are holding a hearing to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas because who knows? The border situation, which is, in my opinion, a bunch of lies, really started from Greg Abbott and kind of snowballed through the entire country on the Republican side. What do you think should be done, could be done, is done? What do we do to get the messaging right? Yeah, so you just tell me, Karthik.
So yeah, this is an interesting issue where it's both like a senatorial one in Texas, since we're just disproportionately affected, as well as something nationally. I'm a son of immigrants, right? And also a teacher in Houston's East End, which is disproportionately Latino, and a ton of my students were dreamers, or their family had lots of undocumented members in it. And so I think what I am always been for in Harris County is a state that has like, one of the things that went viral online that like made me feel kind of sad actually was this comedian who was Ronnie Chang, and he was talking about like, do you all know what the slogan of the state of Texas is? And everyone was just like, guns, blah blah blah, all this like, conservatism first. He was like, friendship. Do you believe that? Friendship. And like I was like, I believe that. That's what we are. We are a big-hearted state that wants to bring anybody in from wherever you are in the world. And Texas is an attitude, the idea that we can make big things possible and bring people together, no matter how you came into this country, how long you've been here, can unite and really accomplish big things together. And so when I see the legislation that's being passed, like SB4, that would incentivize mass racial profiling against Latinos in particular across the state, I spoke out against it. And I'm going to keep fighting against it. And I think it's abominable. I think that it's really unfortunate that like what is a situation that can be dispassionately like looked at as a problem, sort of like the grid to solve, is turned into a giant culture war issue. I think that like if you look at polls, like 70 to 80% of Americans all agree that we need to increase funding in terms of actually seeking through asylee claims, having more immigration judges, having some form of border security, and also providing a pathway to legal status or citizenship for the 15 million people who have called Texas home. And I'm gonna probably get some flack for this, but I talk a lot with like my ex-students and like Latinos in the district, and they feel ignored by the Democratic Party. They're like, oh, people just trot out immigration, but it's been what Obama was elected in 2008. He promised immigration reform. It's been 16 years. So people have lost faith. And I think that Democrats in Congress need to make a mass deal that provides a pathway to citizenship for the millions who have been waiting. And it's a tangible, impactful, powerful thing for every single person there. And I think that we need to be confronting Greg Abbott, because in the bigotry that he's unleashed is is a super like disgusting and malevolent thing. And we need to say this is a fixable issue if we come together like adults and have a giant compromise that involves funding. And I'm excited that Gian gets to push our representation to find a solution about this. In a state capacity, I want to hold Greg Abbott accountable because he's using Texas taxpayer money right now and harming a lot of communities. And I want to make sure he's doing it in a way that's humane and not harming communities, as well as also pushing. If I might have to shake hands with Ted Cruz and my hand will freeze over probably, or maybe it'll be warm because we'll be in Cancun. But I want to push my federal representation to actually pass comprehensive immigration reform, because Republicans just love having this football and never kicking it.
Yep. And you're right. And so Gian is running for Congress. It is Congress's job to do immigration reform, to fix the problems that we have now. Congress is held by Republicans, so they are more interested in, political theater and smoke and mirrors for the cameras than actually meaningful change. Gian, what do you think should be done?
I view immigration like a pot of gumbo. In New Orleans, we love gumbo. And In that pot of gumbo, you have a little bit of everything: shrimp, oysters, sausage, chicken, rice, everything. And that's how we got to view immigration. Immigration only makes us stronger and only makes us better. The things that we are seeing done at the border is criminal. They're putting barbed wire in the water, the displacement of families, ripping families apart from each other. I mean, it is just horrible the things that are going down at the border. And like Karthik was saying, we need a pathway to citizenship. We've got to stop running people through the ringer to become a citizen when these are hardworking Americans. Yes, they're hard. There are hardworking Americans because you look at the statistics. People who come to this country are less likely to commit a crime.
Yeah.
You have natural born citizens who are more likely to commit a crime than an immigrant coming into the country. And so, the Republicans will tout out all of this misinformation and demonizing these people. Like Trump said, they're sending their worst. No, they're not sending their worst. They're sending their best to us to help better our country. And immigration has made America what it is because it's that strength of different cultures, different backgrounds coming into the mix and just making us a whole lot better than what we were before. And so, yes, we need a pathway to citizenship. We need to stop the Republicans, not only Greg Abbott, but also Ron DeSantis, or however you say his name. He doesn't even know how to say his own name. We have got to stop them from shipping families and breaking families apart and demonizing these people. It just has to stop.
Yeah. Okay. And Mo, you had a front row seat last year to a lot of the Republican shenanigans as it pertains to the border, their border patrols and their vigilante ideas, which was ridiculous. From the Texas House perspective, what do you think they can do to kind of not only mitigate the problem, but change the narrative about the issue?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that was really powerful that came out of the debate about SB4 and about some of the other anti-immigrant legislation was Representative Wally when he got up and was sharing his story, and they cut off debate, and that video was going around of him talking about how it hurts and how they don't understand how it affects people, right? And so I think what we've done is, especially in the House, we've tried to look at bipartisan ways of defeating legislation that's bad, right? And so I think one of that is going to be sharing our story and humanizing the experience, because a lot of times for Republicans, they're able to kind of put their hand out and be like, okay, that's over their problem. So that way they can look at it through a different lens rather than looking at for what it is, which is a humanitarian crisis, right? So coming from a mixed immigration household, both in my biological family and in my adopted family, some of the legislation that we're looking at, especially in SB4, where I can get in trouble for just taking my Wella down the street to Walmart, like that's wild to me to think that I could be at a carne asada or guisada and celebrating, a quince with my family, and immigration comes in and, raids the place, and then now I'm in trouble. And so I think what we need to do in the House is, one, humanize the experience, right? This is not an over there problem. They love to say that the cartels are flooding us and they're running over and they're gonna kill us and all these things. And so something about this that I noticed in their narrative, right, of how they speak about immigrants is the same narrative that was used during the civil rights movement about Black folks who were protesting for their rights, right? And so we see this kind of full circle moment of hearing this narrative all over again. And it's something interesting that my great aunt actually pointed out to me, and I was like, didn't even realize. And so I think we need to employ those same tactics that we did during the civil rights movement of humanizing ourselves, but also protecting our immigrant brothers and sisters and protecting our families from these racial profiling laws. And so something that the House definitely needs to do, that we tried, but I think we weren't as successful, is using every tool in the toolbox. again, the Senate has more strict rules. Nothing really gets through unless Dan Patrick wants it to. But in the House, the members are really empowered to bring up those points of order, to fight down bad legislation. And so I think that's really what we need to focus on, especially going into this next session as we try to repeal those laws, but also making sure we use every arsenal in our toolbox to make sure that those bills don't make it out of committee, but to make sure that those bills don't even make it out of second reading and defeat them right there on the House floor. And that's one of the things that I hope to be a part of. My member, they used to call him Mr. Parliamentary Inquiry. And because of him, I have developed a fondness for the rules. And I understand that there are so many different mechanisms that we can use, kind of like Gian said when we're talking to voters, guerrilla warfare, where we just pellet them to the point where they, you know, they don't even want to go forward anymore because it's so much work to even get it through the process. And so I think that's really what we can do in the House by bogging down the process to make sure that the bills don't even go through. And yes, that may mean we sacrifice some of our own bills, but it's for the greater good of all 30 million Texans and all 30 million people who call Texas their home.
Okay, so we are just about out of time. You guys are fantastic. All three of you have a lot of really good ideas. And so I just want to give each of you like a minute or two to wrap it up, or say where they can find you on, where people can find you online. Let's start with Gian. Take it away.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm running to stop America from becoming a third world country with a Gucci belt. That is slowly what we are becoming. It is absolutely terrible. We have 40% of Americans can't handle an unexpected $400 expense. 60% of Americans want a living wage, and 70% of Americans want universal health care. We have got to fight and champion for these policies, because it is the only thing that is going to help us not lose our way of life and not lose the American dream. The American dream is dying, and we need younger people, people of color, people with different backgrounds to get involved in our political system so they can put their input in how the system has not been fair to them, and put that in, have that perspective and that view in legislation and policy. You guys can find me. I'm on Facebook. I don't do social. I don't do X. I'm not really on Instagram. I'm kind of an old head. So y'all can find me on Facebook, Gian Thomas for CD38. Also, you can find me on my website, Gian4Texas.com. They have all of my policy positions, events, different articles written about me and what we're doing in the community. So look for me on there. I see everybody at the polls on March 5th. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
Absolutely. And okay, let's go to Mo.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so glad to have been a part of this panel and talk a little bit about some of the things going on in the state. I'm fighting for quality and affordable healthcare, fully funded public education. I'd be darn over my dead body if we ever put any money into these voucher scams. And then also just fighting for a more equal Texas, right? I'm using my life experience to turn passion into policy so that people don't have to go through the same things that I did, losing their mother at a young age because of the abhorrent access to care in this state. Making sure that we don't have kids that are homeless and falling through the cracks of the foster care system because Republicans are more worried about building walls than building bridges. And so that's really what I'm about looking forward into this. You can find me on every social media platform. Being part of Gen Z, I'm like on every app imaginable. So you can find me on everything. Mo, the number 4 Texas on everything. You can go to my website, mojenkins.com, to view our policy platforms to just learn more about this campaign and this historic run to take the Texas House.
Okay, perfect. And last but not least, Karthik.
Hey y'all, my name is Karthik Sura, just like Karthik. I am a former award-winning HISD teacher, current renewable energy developer. I'm not taking a cent of corporate PAC money, and I want to make it illegal for legislators to serve as lobbyists, as what we've seen in the Paxton trial. We have a legislature, and lots of legislators that are bought out by special interests and super controlled by the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. And we need to stand up against hate, and we need to fight to change the legislature. And so one of the things that I am passionate about are new ideas like citizen-led ballot initiatives, so we can put Roe v. Wade, universal gun background checks, Medicaid expansion, ending gerrymandering, and more on the ballot to Texans like folks in other states do. I've stood up against the HISD takeover from the very start. I'm one of the few candidates who testified at the Texas State Legislature against SB 4 and said it was an awful, awful bill. And I've also been active in the movement for criminal justice reform to say that the deaths in the Harris County Jail are unacceptable. And if you were down to get involved in our campaign, we've been knocking since the summer and in this crazy, even in the crazy heat and now in the bitter cold, but we're in it to fight for Texans, to make history for the state, to elect the first minority to ever represent this district in the history of Texas, as well as the first Asian American in the Texas State Senate. And so you can find us at www.karthik, Karthik for Texas.com. Please donate, please volunteer. And unlike Gian, I love using all the socials. And you can please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, whatever that's there. And thanks to Michelle for giving us all this opportunity to speak. And thanks to all of your viewers for the passion that they bring in flipping Texas. It really, really means a lot. And I know that change is possible in Texas. We're the state that passed the Civil Rights Act, that argued Roe v. Wade, that got the Voting Rights Act passed, that got Medicare passed, and we could do big things once again. I believe in that.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you everybody for joining, and we'll see you next Wednesday at noon.